It is September 5th of 2003, just after 10 a.m., inside Disneyland in Anaheim, California. The park is alive with families streaming through Main Street, the smell of popcorn and churros hanging in the warm air. For many, it is an ordinary Friday morning, the start of a long weekend filled with rides, laughter, and memories. In Frontierland, one of the most popular attractions is already drawing a crowd. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, the runway mine train coaster, has been thrilling guests since 1979. Its rickety wooden station, desert canyons, and roaring tunnels make it feel like a piece of the Old West come alive. The trains wind through caves, past dynamite blasts, and over creaking bridges, reaching speeds of 35 miles per hour. It is not the fastest or tallest ride in the park, but it has always been a favorite, especially for families. That morning, 22-year-old Marcelo Torres climbed into the very first car of the train. Marcelo Torres was a graphic design student from Gardena, California. Friends described him as quiet but warm, someone who loved sketching, music, and escaping into places that sparked his imagination. Disneyland had always been one of those escapes. It was where he went to clear his head, to feel like a kid again, and to enjoy the rides he had grown up with. On that Friday morning, he came alone, ready for a day of simple fun at the park. As Marcelo settled into the front seat, other guests filled the cars behind him, laughing as the lap bars locked in place. The ride operator gave a signal, and with a loud hiss, the train pulled out of the station. The first climb took the train into the heart of the mountain. Darkness fell as the cars rattled through the wooden tunnel. But as the train crested the hill, something went wrong. Hidden from view, a crucial part of the locomotive's undercarriage had not been properly secured during maintenance. With a violent lurch, the front locomotive separated from the passengers' cars. The cars, still coupled together, slammed forward into the derailed engine. The force sent shockwaves down the train, throwing riders against the restraints. Marcelo, seated in the very front, took the brunt of the impact. The derailed engine crushed into his car, pinning him beneath the wreckage. Behind him, 10 other passengers were thrown violently, suffering broken bones and deep cuts. The dark tunnel echoed with screams. Operators rushed to shut down the ride. Guests stumbled out of the mountain in shock, covered in dust and blood. Paramedics pushed their way through the crowds to reach the scene, but Marcelo Torres could not be saved. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The investigations that followed revealed a chain of failures. Maintenance crews had not properly tightened bolts in the locomotive's undercarriage, and inspectors had missed visible signs of wear. Records later showed that the cast members had reported unusual noises and jerking movements on the ride in the weeks before the accident, but those warnings never reached the engineers responsible for safety checks. The California Division of Occupational Safety and Health concluded that the train had been allowed to operate with parts that were very dangerously loose. The very bolts that were supposed to secure the locomotive had worked themselves free over time, leaving the engine vulnerable to detaching. Disney closed Big Thunder Mountain immediately after the crash. For months, the ride stood silent while engineers rebuilt the track and overhauled inspection procedures. By the time it reopened in 2004, millions of dollars had been spent on repairs and safety upgrades. But for Marcelo Torres and the other victims of that September morning, those changes came too late. Disney later paid millions in settlements to Torres' victims. The ride was closed for months, rebuilt with stricter safety checks before reopening. But for those inside Big Thunder Mountain that September morning, the memory would never fade. What began as a day of joy ended in silence inside the mountain. For Marcelo Torres, the ride he loved became the last he would ever take. It is late September of 2014 in central Japan. The air is crisp, the sky is clear, and the first colors of autumn are spreading across the ridges that separate Nagano and Gifu, two mountainous regions in the heart of the country. At 3,067 meters, Mount Ontake towers above the countryside, its slopes framed with golden grass and red-leaf trees. For generations, the mountain has been a place of peace and pilgrimage. Shrines line the trails, prayer tablets hang from wooden posts, and thousands of visitors climb here each year, not only for the view, but also for a sense of connection with the divine. Mount Ontake was technically an active volcano, but it had not erupted since the late 1970s. Decades of quiet had made people forget the risk. To hikers, the mountain seemed stable, safe, even welcoming. Local guides spoke of it as a place of spirituality rather than danger. On weekends, groups of families, students, and tourists made climbs together. By the autumn of 2014, Ontake had become one of the most popular hiking spots in Japan. That year, the fall colors were especially bright, and on the last Saturday of September, the conditions seemed perfect. Clear skies, light winds, no warning that the mountain was about to wake. It is September 27th, 2014. Just before noon, hundreds of people are spread across Mount Ontake's trails. Some are already near the summit shrines, pausing to rest or take photos. Others are making their way up the ridges, enjoying the cool air and the sweeping views below. For everyone on the mountain, it feels like an ordinary Saturday. At 11:52 a.m., that changes. Without warning, a roar erupts from deep inside Ontake. The ground shudders. From the summit, a massive column of ash bursts into the sky, climbing thousands of meters in seconds. What had been a calm blue morning is instantly torn apart by a black and gray cloud rising above the peak. At first, some hikers thought they were watching a small eruption. Something dramatic, but not immediately dangerous. Phones and cameras came out, recording the plume as it spreads wider and darker across the sky. But within moments, it becomes clear that this is no small eruption. The ash begins stirring down, carried by the wind, and the cloud is moving directly toward the trails. In less than a minute, the mountain shifts from peaceful to terrifying. Hikers who had been eating lunch or taking pictures are suddenly scrambling for cover. The sound of the eruption rolls across the slopes like thunder. Ash stings their eyes. The air fills with a choking dust that makes it hard to breathe. And then the rocks begin to fall. At first, they are small, bouncing harmlessly off the trail, but quickly they grow larger, some the size of fists, others heavy enough to shatter the ground where they land. The ash cloud thickens, turning daylight into a dim gray. Hikers cover their heads with jackets and backpacks, but the mountain offers little shelter. Visibility drops to only a few meters. People stumble through the haze, coughing, blinded by the sting of ash on their eyes. Some cry out for family or friends, their voices swallowed by the roar overhead. Those near mountain huts and shrines push desperately inside, cramming together in dark wooden rooms as rocks hammer the roofs. Others, caught in the open, crouch behind boulders or simply run, not knowing which direction is safe. On the ridges, some hikers made desperate choices. A few tried to descend, guided only by memory, but soon got lost in the fog. Others stayed still, hoping rescue would come, their bodies huddled against boulders already dusted white. Survivors later spoke of time stretching into something unreal. Minutes felt like hours. The roar of the eruption faded in and out, but the ash never stopped. It coated hair, skin, and clothes. When rescuers finally reached the mountain, the scene was almost unrecognizable. The bright colors of autumn had been buried under a thick blanket of ash. Hiking poles, backpacks, and shoes stuck out of the gray surface, silent reminders of the people who had been there only a few hours earlier. In the days that followed, rescue teams searched hut by hut, ridge by ridge. Helicopters circled overhead, lifting the injured from shelters. Many of the victims had been struck where they stood, killed instantly by falling rocks. In total, 63 people lost their lives. Most were ordinary hikers who had set out that morning for a day of fresh air and mountain views. Among them were students, retirees, and families who had simply chosen the wrong day to climb. Recovery stretched on for weeks. Each trip back on the slopes carried risks, as Ontake continued to rumble with smaller bursts of steam and gas. Rescuers wore helmets and carried oxygen tanks. The eruption was later called the deadliest in Japan in nearly a century. For the survivors and for the families of those who did not return, it was a reminder that even the most peaceful landscapes can change in an instant. What had begun as a perfect autumn day ended with silence, ash, and loss on the mountain that hikers once believed was safe. April 16th, 2014. Dawn breaks over Incheon, South Korea. At the port, buses arrive one after another, releasing groups of high school students carrying backpacks and pillows. For many, it is their first school trip away from home without family. The destination is Jeju Island, a popular spot for school excursions, promising beaches, and a break from classrooms. The students file up the gangway of the MV Sewol, a large ferry that has made the route many times before. Their chatter fills the air with talks of snacks, games, and the friends they will sit with during the voyage. Teachers keep watch as they board, counting heads and urging them along. The morning is calm, the sky is pale blue, and the sea rests in gentle swells. The ferry's departure is uneventful, its engines pushing the vessel steadily southward. Inside, the atmosphere quickly relaxes. Some students unpack instant noodles, others pose for photos, and a few retreat to cabins for sleep. From the outside, there is nothing unusual. The ship moves smoothly through open water. To those on board, it feels like the start of a long-awaited adventure. What no one sees is the hidden weight below deck, or the changes made to the vessel that altered how it handled the sea. The Sewol was not a new ship. Originally built in Japan in the 1990s, it had been purchased and refitted for use in South Korea. The modifications added more passenger cabins and increased its capacity, but they also made the vessel heavier on the upper decks. The stability that once had saved margins was now reduced. On the morning of the voyage, the ferry was not only carrying hundreds of students and their teachers, but also a large load of cargo, trucks, cars, and shipping containers stacked in its hold. Many of them weren't secured properly, and below the waterline, the ballast tanks, meant to steady the ship, hadn't been filled as recommended. These details were invisible to the passengers. On the surface, the ship appeared solid, steady, and capable. Yet inside, its design and loading were small imbalances, waiting for the wrong moment to show themselves. At 8:49 a.m., the ferry approached the water near Jindo, where the channel narrowed and currents ran stronger. The crew initiated a sharp turn to adjust course. For a vessel already carrying excess weight high above its center of gravity, that maneuver was dangerous. The Sewol lurched to one side. At first, it was only a tilt, the kind that might cause someone to grab the wall for balance. But the lean did not correct itself. It grew steeper, sending objects sliding across floors and passengers stumbling into railings. Water sloshed against the windows. As the tilt deepened, alarms rang through the ship. Passengers clutched the walls, trying to move against the slope of the decks. Some reached for life jackets, others pulled out their phones to call home. Teachers shouted for their students to stay calm. Then came the announcement over the loudspeakers. The crew instructed everyone to remain where they were. Stay inside your cabins, do not move. For many, the order seemed reassuring. A ship this large, they believed, would soon right itself. Obeying directions felt safer than scrambling in confusion. So groups of students returned to their rooms, some sitting on the floor in their life vests, waiting. A few began recording messages for family, their voices quiet, but steady. Meanwhile, the tilt grew sharper. Walking the hallways became nearly impossible. Doors that once opened freely now jammed against their frames. The ferry was not stabilizing. It was sinking. The angle of the deck became unbearable. Tables toppled, glass shattered, and seawater surged through open passages. Onboard cameras later showed hallways turning into steep slopes, students crawling and pulling themselves upward as the ship listed farther onto its side. Outside, Coast Guard vessels and fishing boats began to arrive, circling the tilted ferry. From their decks, rescuers could see passengers clustered on the upper railings, some climbing desperately towards open air. Others were visible through windows, trapped inside as the waterline rose higher. Inside the cabins, darkness spread as power flickered and failed. The tilt meant doors would not open and stairways no longer led upward. For those who had followed the announcement to stay put, escape was becoming impossible. Within little more than an hour after the first lurch, the seawall was lying on its side, most of its hull underwater, hundreds of lives trapped within. By the time the seawall capsized, hundreds remained inside. Rescue boats pulled survivors from the water and from the few exposed sections of the deck, but the majority never made it out. In total, 304 lives were lost, most of them students who had followed the order to stay where they were. The days that followed were filled with grief and anger. Families gathered on the shore, waiting for news as divers searched the wreck. Each recovery deepened the national shock. Investigations revealed how overloaded cargo, empty ballast tanks, and fatal indecision on the bridge had turned a routine voyage into a catastrophe. The disaster reshaped South Korea. It led to trials, resignations, and new safety laws. But beyond the official responses, the loss of so many young lives left a wound that has never fully healed. The name Sewol became a symbol of both tragedy and remembrance.